The house she built. My name is Alina Whitfield. I live in a quiet little town called Millbrook, tucked between soft green hills and rows of ancient maple trees. I am 81 years old, and my chest carries a story I swore I would never speak aloud. People tell me I have a gentle smile, but none of them ever see the ache hiding just behind it. I once had a son. My pride. My whole reason for waking up every morning. I gave him everything I had, my love, my care, every hour of a life spent working with my hands. I believed our bond would never break. But life has a cruel way of twisting things you never saw coming, and the very boy I raised became the deepest wound I have ever carried. When my husband Thomas and I brought our son Michael into this world, I felt a joy I couldn't put into words. He had Thomas's steady hands and my stubborn chin, a perfect blend of both our hearts stitched into one small face. I spent my days as a seamstress, stitching dresses and mending coats for the whole town, while Thomas worked the family orchard from sunrise to sunset. Every evening he'd come home dusty and worn out, and the second he heard Michael's laughter, all the tiredness melted right off him. We taught our boy kindness, honesty, and respect. He grew up wrapped in love, and I truly believed he'd carry those lessons with him forever. I had no idea back then that time and ambition could turn even the purest heart cold. Michael grew into a sharp, brilliant young man. He studied hard and won a scholarship to a university clear across the country in Denver. I was bursting with pride. Thomas cried the morning Michael left, gripping his hand tight while our son promised he'd call every week, visit every holiday. I believed every word of it, but the years slipped by and those calls grew fewer and further between. He always said he was chasing something big, that success took sacrifice, and I told myself he just needed room to grow. I didn't understand, yet that distance builds walls even love can't tear down. I kept setting money aside for him anyway, certain that someday he'd come home and build a life close to us again. Then Thomas got sick. I called Michael, hoping, praying he'd rush home. He said work had him buried, but he wired money for the treatments. Thomas smiled weakly and said, "At least he remembered us." I saw straight through that smile to the hurt underneath. He missed his boy more than he'd ever admit, but he asked me to stay strong for both of them. The nights stretched on forever after that, filled with the sound of his coughing and my whispered prayers. Michael never came, not even when things turned for the worse. On his last day, Thomas breathed, "Tell him I forgive him." My heart shattered knowing he'd leave this world without laying eyes on his only son one more time. After the funeral, I sat alone for hours just staring at his photograph, wondering exactly where it had all gone wrong. Weeks later, Michael finally showed up, dressed in an expensive suit, holding a bouquet of white lilies. Guilt sat heavy on his face, but his eyes stayed distant, somewhere far away from me. He hugged me quickly and said he was sorry he'd missed the end. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stayed quiet and told him his father had forgiven him, hoping it might bring some peace to us both. Inside, though, something in me cracked. That night, I looked around the house that used to overflow with laughter, and now it only held echoes. Michael stayed a few days, mostly talking about his business and his life in the city. He seemed proud of everything he'd built, but he never once asked how I was managing on my own. One afternoon, he told me he wanted to sell the family house and move me into an apartment. He said it would be easier for everyone. My whole body went still. This was the house, Thomas, and I built board by board with our own hands, every corner soaked in memories of him. I gently refused, telling him I planned to stay here until my very last breath. He looked disappointed, like I'd ruined some plan he'd already set in motion. A week later, he went back to the city, and for months, silence. Then one morning, a letter arrived from a law firm. My son had filed to take legal ownership of my house, claiming I was too old to manage things on my own. I stood there shaking, unable to believe it. The boy I once carried in my arms, the boy who used to call me his hero, now wanted to strip me of my home. Betrayal cut through my chest like a blade. My hands trembled, but my mind stayed clear. I decided I would fight, no matter how old or tired I felt. I went to see the town lawyer, an old friend named Harold Bennett. He listened quietly, then rested his hand on my shoulder. "Alina," he said firmly, "you have every right to keep your home." We gathered documents, letters, every scrap of proof that the house was mine, fully and legally. I barely slept those weeks. Memories of Michael as a little boy kept surfacing, holding his tiny hand as he learned to walk, teaching him right from wrong. And now I was preparing to face him across a courtroom. Life can be so unbearably cruel. When love collides with greed, the heart bleeds quietly with every passing hour. The court hearing felt like a nightmare. Michael sat there, confident, flanked by lawyers. I stayed silent, clutching my old handbag, and he never once looked me in the eye. When the judge asked why I refused to hand over the property, I answered calmly, because her spirit still lives there. My voice shook, but the truth held steady. After days of hearings, the court ruled in my favor. I won the case, but the victory felt hollow. My son walked past me without a single word, his face twisted with anger. I reached out, but he was already gone. I went home alone after the trial. The air felt colder somehow, the silence deeper than before. I sat in Thomas's old rocking chair and whispered, "I did it, my love, I kept our home." But peace never came. I had protected our memories and lost my only child doing it. The nights grew longer, full of thoughts I couldn't shake. I'd catch myself staring at the phone, waiting for Michael to call and say he was sorry. Months turned into years, and his voice never came back. I realized I had given him everything, and he had chosen money over love. That truth burned quietly inside me for a long, long time. One afternoon, a stranger showed up at my door, introducing himself as one of Michael's business partners. His voice was hesitant. He said Michael's company had collapsed over a fraud scandal, and he'd lost absolutely everything. My heart sank instantly. Despite everything, my love for him hadn't gone anywhere. I packed some money and drove out to Denver to find him. I found him living in a tiny rented room, thin and broken down. The moment he saw me, his eyes filled with tears, and he whispered, "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness." I pulled him into my arms, speechless. My heart breaking open all over again. We sat together for hours, talking softly about everything we'd lost. He cried like a little boy, and I saw exactly how far he'd fallen from the man he once wanted to be. I never scolded him. I just held his hand. He told me greed had blinded him, made him forget the love he'd grown up surrounded by. "I thought success would make me proud," he whispered. I told him pride never mattered, only love ever did. His eyes filled again as he said, "I wish I'd understood that sooner." My heart still ached, but at least the truth had finally found its way back between us. I brought him home to Millbrook. The neighbors whispered, but I stopped caring what they thought. I gave him a small workshop near the house to help him start over. Slowly, piece by piece, he rebuilt his life, fixing furniture and relearning patience along the way. I'd catch glimpses of guilt in his eyes sometimes, but I never brought up the past. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, it just teaches your heart how to carry it. Every morning he'd help me in the garden, planting roses near the spot Thomas loved most. Watching him work quietly beside me, I felt something in my chest slowly begin to heal. Maybe love really can repair what betrayal once broke. The years that followed were peaceful. Michael became a better man, humbler, kinder, gentler than before. He'd often say, "Mom, I wish Dad could see us now." Then he'd smile softly, looking up at the sky. Maybe he could. Some evenings we'd sit together on the porch, watching the sunset in silence. I knew the pain had changed us both, but the love had survived it. Folks around town liked to say, "Eliner's lucky her boy came back." They don't know the price I paid for that homecoming. My son wounded me in ways I never imagined, but he also taught me the hardest truth of all, that even a broken love can bloom again. Now, in these last years of mine, I often sit by the window watching Michael tend to the very house he once tried to take from me. Life has finally closed its circle. I still remember the tears, the trial, the silence, and the embrace that followed after. Pain and love live side by side in my heart, like light and shadow sharing the same room. I forgave him completely, not because he earned it, but because peace needs room to breathe too. I close my eyes and whisper it one more time. "I loved you deeply, my son, and no matter how much it hurt, I always will." And finally, the silence feels kind.